Poverty is not just the absence of money, but the absence of opportunity. And the United States is a country where you have both freedom and abundant opportunities. And moving to the United States has given me both. I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knit family. I was the third of four children. And the best thing that my parents gave me was the gift of education. Even though I came from a poor family, they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. But what my parents did was that they instilled in us the value of faith, hard work, and not giving up. They made us realize that if you put in the work, you will definitely get the reward. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. I got my first job at the age of 14. My job was on a construction site. My duties were to move concrete on a large pan from one end of the construction site to another one. I worked on that day from around 6 in the morning to about 7 at night. At the end of the day, the employer refused to pay me. And the reason was because she did not authorize the foreman to hire me. So I worked from sunup to sundown and didn't get paid. That tore up my spirit. And from that moment on, I decided that I was going to become a lawyer. And I was going to use every ounce of strength within me to fight against injustice, regardless of how powerful the opponent is. I am a man that worked my way up from nothing. I know what it means to feel like you're being unfairly treated, and I'm the person that can stand up to opponents regardless of how big or how powerful they are. Welcome to this episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel the Law Olawale. My guest today is Judge Karen Phipps of the Franklin County Common Pleas Court in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome to the show, Your Honor.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
And thank you for making it. Can you please tell us more about yourself for those who are not familiar with who you are?
Certainly. Re-listening to your story, I see such a correlation between your life and my life. I am the 15th of 16 children. My father was an immigrant. He came over from Holland when he was 5 with his 5 siblings and just his parents. They were fleeing the Nazi regime, and they came to America. And they were, at that point in time, when immigrants came, they shifted you to areas where the weather was similar to your own country. So my family, we all were raised in Wisconsin because that was weather-wise. My mom and dad got married right after my dad came back from serving in WW2, and then they proceeded to have their very large family. We were obviously, I never thought of myself as poor, but as an adult, I look back and say we were poor. I mean, I had 2 outfits for school for a year, but I never once did my family make me feel like I was poor. We had food, we had shelter, we had as much love as my mom could spread, and love among siblings. And so, again, when you come from, I think, that foundation of spiritual values and hard work and ethics, you transfer that to your children, and the first thing they teach you is education. Education, education, education. Because one, my mom and dad used to say, your education no one can ever take from you. Because they both were raised during the Depression era. They had, they lived in families that worked very hard, and then during the Depression, everything was taken from almost everybody. And my mother's father ran a dairy in Wisconsin, and I'll just tell a quick story about his values during the Depression. So obviously no one has any money to pay for milk or cheese, and because it's a depression. And so my grandfather's rule was, if you had paid your bill all along during the depression, you will continue to get milk and any other products they sold. And then he ran a tab for people. And I think, if I'm remembering the story correctly, my grandmother received payments of like a nickel a month, like for 20 years after my grandfather had died. So he provided what he could to the community to keep other people from starving, because he had the product, and the people who paid their bill, he felt they'd be paying me now if they could, and their family needs the milk. And that's, I mean, I don't think I could ever accomplish something that equals that level of community service, but that instilled in me a very strong need to do what I can for everyone in the community. And that means you do more for the have-nots than the haves. So I was raised in a large family. My dad passed when my mom still had, I think, 9 kids at home, and she had never worked because she always took care of the household. And we all stayed together, and my mom somehow managed to take care of us and get us off. Now, when it came to college, it was obviously going to be on us. And so I took the long route to school. I got married very young at 18, had my first 2 kids, my 2 kids when I was in my early 20s. The marriage didn't work out. So at about 29, as a single mom with 2 kids that weren't even in school yet, I realized, okay, time to get that education. And I worked nights bartending, and went to school and went right through undergrad to law school. I started law school right after my kids started grade school, and took the bar, passed it, was working in a firm all through law school, and then doing civil work. And then as I got closer to taking the bar and took the bar, I did become an associate at the firm. And I'm not going to say the firm, because what I'm going to say is women were not treated equally at the firm. So I decided, because my background was in business finance, that I could run a business. So I just opened my own firm. Well, it wasn't even a year after I graduated, and I quickly realized that litigation is where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in the courtroom. And then I moved into criminal defense, because that is what gets you in the courtroom every single day. And I ran my own practice for 15 years, and then I ran for judge, and I took the bench in 2019. So I've been here on the bench since 2019.
Oh, what an awesome story. And, growing up the way you did. What was it like, seeing your mom trying to raise 9 kids on her own, and you're one of those kids? What was that like for you?
Um, you know, we used to joke about my mom having a get out of hell free card, that if she had gone on a killing spree in her old age, God would have had to say, ma'am, you get a pass. Come on in. She taught me unyielding work ethic. She never lectured about it. She never, said you need to have a good work ethic. It was just ingrained in everything she did. And she was a very, very smart woman, and had been in college before she married my dad. But then, of course, they started having kids right away. And she was very good with numbers. She clearly could manage a budget. And she instilled responsibility in us. And whether I liked that or not as a child, I look back on that, and I realize how much whatever was lacking in my life, the important thing was my mom and dad were instilling survival and moving forward in us. And that is a quality every human being should have instilled in them. And unfortunately, the less fortunate don't often have parents who push their children to be successful.
Yeah, correct. Because people like you are an exception. When you come from a background like that. Most people who grew up the way you did don't make it up to where you are right now. And you also have other obstacles. It wasn't just, they gave you that values. You work hard, you have faith, you do this, you do that, but it's also up to you, because you mentioned that you had two kids, and as a single mom, 29 years old, you went back to college. What
Mhm.
was that like? And then you're bartending at night. Yeah, what was that like
Um,
for you? How did you manage it?
I didn't have an option not to manage it. That is how my mother raised us. You don't have an option not to manage. You manage and you figure it out. The kids were fortunately academically inclined themselves, and so we did. I mean, the TV wasn't on, video games weren't played. We were all in school, and I believe my son was 9 the first time he said to me, "Life isn't fair," and I'm like, "Really? You're 9? What's not fair?" And he's like, "Well, I can't complain about my homework because you're always doing more homework than me." And I said, "Well, son, you're right. You can't complain about your homework because other people are working harder and have bigger hurdles." And so we just did homework together. And I will have to say that during law school, I did nothing but school, work, and parent. I was willing to forego anything that would have been for me, because I needed to get through it and it was a limited time. Um, I equated it to 3 years of like when you're pregnant. You give up everything that could possibly harm that baby and you do everything you can to make sure your baby is healthy. And so I just took that fundamental and applied it to, I'm going to do absolutely everything I can to be successful in law school and to pass the bar, and everything else has to be set aside for now. And um, you just have to do that. Sometimes in life, you have to realize it's not about I want to hang out with my friends. It's about let's get to the next phase.
Hmm. You had to grow up so fast. And what inspired you to go to law school? It's one thing to do college while raising kids. It's another to say, you know what? I'm going to go to law school. What inspired you?
That came out of my childhood. So when we brought report cards home, it was back in the day when your parent had to review your report card, sign it, and then return it to the teacher. And so the method in our household was oldest to youngest stood in line with their report card. And my father and mother would sit at the table and then talk to each child about their grades. And um, I realized at a very young age that there was inequity in how the boys were being treated versus how the girls were being treated. I often heard, "Oh, good job, you got a C in that class," and for the boys, and the girls would hear, "You got an A minus. Why are you getting an A minus?" And I remember as a very young child standing at the back of a line, it takes an hour or two, standing there going, "Well, this isn't fair." And so then as you grow up and you're starting to think about what are you going to do for a living? What are you going to do to support yourself? What are you going to do for your life? At a very young age, I tried to figure out, well, what job helps the world be more fair, more equitable? And as so at a very primitive age, I realized, well, judges do that. They they make sure people are treated fairly. That was my immature assessment of what that job was. So at a very young age, I thought, well, that's the job I want. I want to help make the world more fair. So it was always a passion. Um, I decided to have kids very young because my mom I was at the bottom of the heap, so she was 40 when I was born. And the only things she couldn't do were the things that a young mom would do, run in the yard, chase after you on your bike, and all those physical activities that take so much energy. And so I wanted to have my kids young. Plus, I also didn't want to get caught in that trap that women get in where they do get a profession right away, and then suddenly they're 35 and they want to have a baby, but they're afraid of what that's going to do to their career. And so I just, somewhere in my mind, I decided I'll just have my babies first, and then I'll have my career later, which was insane. I mean, it's not easy to go to school and raise children, but, you know, again, it was the path I chose, and I was going to, you know, I don't recommend it. I didn't recommend it to my children. I pushed them to go to school right away. And, you know, both of my kids went to school, and both of them have a graduate degree. My daughter teaches in Reynoldsburg, and she has her master's in education. And my son went to school for biology and undergrad, and then he got his PhD in entomology, which is, he's a bug doctor. And that's a 5-year PhD. So both of them, and now my son is married and has identical twin boys that are 2, and so our family is growing, and that's pretty exciting. But my son and I just had a conversation this last week about, he got punished pretty severely when he was a teenager for lying. And when I say pretty severely, he was grounded for 6 months. Now, what he didn't know was that he got grounded a month for each lie he told, because when I confronted him about his lie, he doubled down and continued to lie, because teenagers think they're smarter than grown-ups. And so I asked him, he's like, do you think that was harsh? I said, well, I'm telling you, I probably grounded you a month for every lie, and you weren't going to be ungrounded till I could trust you again. That was the lesson that I was teaching you, is you losing someone's trust and being dishonest is very expensive when you get caught. And he actually said to me just this week, you know, Mom, you're right, because I don't lie, and I don't like people who lie, because I don't want to sift through the truth. And so I was like, okay, that worked out okay. It could have turned out the other way, but it worked out all right.
Very interesting. You've been wired to do hard things. And those values, they bled through to your parenting, to the way you choose a career. And what I'm hearing you say is that even when you decide to have kids, you want to be the parent or the mom to your kids that your mom wasn't to you, so that you still have the energy to run around the things that you missed as a kid. You make sure that your
Yep.
kids didn't miss that.
Yep.
And then you went through law school, graduated, worked somewhere for a year, and you took that leap of faith to start your own practice. What was that like, making that decision to go out on your own, being a young, new attorney?
It was scary, you know, because it's about how are you going to pay your bills and support yourself. But due to my circumstance of where I was working, the men had a paralegal and a secretary. The female attorneys did not. So I was already used to doing all the work, so that wasn't going to be a problem. I knew how to run a business because I was a finance major. So I just said, I can do all this work for myself and keep the money. I mean, what it came down to. And the gentleman who replaced me got a secretary, got a paralegal, and got twice the salary. So I made the right decision. The first year was very hard, but I'm a quick study and obviously not afraid to hard work. So then I just went to other people I knew that were out there on their own and talked to them about, you know, what's the best way to move forward. And by the end of the first year, I was busy as I wanted to be. So that first year was really hard, and you have to have, you know, money set aside to support yourself. But once you get going, if you are willing to do the work, you can do it. I was really quite happy once I, you know, got my feet wet and really started, you know, moving ahead.
And you spent a lot of time in the courtroom because you did criminal law, you did some civil cases. And when did you know that it was the right time to move towards that your childhood dream of being someone who, you know, being a judge where you are right now? How did you make that decision?
I think it took me till on a regular basis, I had to find ways to help the judge understand they were incorrect. Because for any lawyer out there, they know exactly what I'm talking about. For the non-lawyers, it would be like trying to help your boss understand that they're making a huge mistake when it's their business and it's not yours and you just work for them. So it takes a lot of class and a lot of tact. So once I got to the point where I really felt confident in what I was doing and that I understood where to find the answers if I didn't know them, that was when I decided it was time to transition. I mean, I spent 15 years representing people who were indigent and accused of really heinous crimes, and my people who are non-criminal defense attorneys or non-lawyers, I would often get, well, how can you represent those people? And my response would be, you mean people with constitutional rights? People who are innocent until they're proven guilty? Those people? Because that's you. That's you, that's your son, that's your neighbor. That could be anyone. Anyone could be wrongfully accused. Now, reality, most people are guilty of something. Maybe not what they're charged with, but the people who are in serious trouble usually there's some basis to the charge. However, that doesn't mean the police don't need to be doing their job correctly. People's rights don't need to be respected. And I can tell you that I want to say almost every single homicide trial I had in which someone was found guilty, when I went back to talk to my client after they were found guilty, I would usually get, "Thank you, Miss Karen. I just wanted somebody to stand up for me. I just wanted somebody just once to stand up for me." And that gets me emotional today still, because how sad is it that you could go your whole life and be in a situation where you might be spending the rest of your life in prison and no one has ever stood up for you. At least that's how you feel. That's really sad to me, which explains why people get in those kinds of situations, is because they don't have anybody caring for them. But people's rights are so important, and this will lead us right into talking about equity in sentencing. If you are in trouble, and you deserve to have somebody helping you who is going to give it their all, even if they know you are 100% guilty of what you're accused. The pressure is really on when they're not guilty. That's a different kind of pressure, because innocent people do get found guilty of things, and that's a different kind of pressure and a very longer conversation. But when we talk about equity and people, it's the lawyer's job to make sure that at no point did the defendant get their rights violated. At no point were they put under some undue influence, and was the evidence stored properly. And no, my job is not to just get people found not guilty. I didn't feel that. I felt that my job was to make sure the state did their job, because for someone to go to prison or even be put on probation, the state must prove beyond a reasonable doubt that they're guilty of what they're accused. And my job was to make sure they did their job and to protect people, because our system is very good. It is much better than many, many countries. But there needs to be the checks and balances, and that's why people have constitutional rights, and that's why there's statutes in place, and that is why people have a right to a trial. And when I was practicing still, I used to tell juries, just to get them in the right frame of mind, this is not about guilty or innocent. This is about guilty or not guilty. And I'd say babies are innocent because they have committed no sin or no crime or no lie. Toddlers even lie. So stop thinking that this is about innocence. This is about guilty or not guilty. And if the state doesn't prove it, then the defendant is not guilty. It doesn't mean they're innocent. That's not what you're weighing. And it's so many people who go first come to juries don't have any clue. They just think about, are you innocent or are you guilty? And it isn't about innocence. It's about whether the state has done their job and proven everything beyond a reasonable doubt.
Hmm. You spent most of your professional life before you become a judge defending those who couldn't defend themselves against the state. And from what you said, in some instances you were successful, you got not guilty verdict. In others, you got guilty verdict. And now becoming as a judge, based on your experience as a criminal defense attorney, how do you define equitable sentence?
Just an attorney in general, equitable sentence isn't about everybody who gets charged with, let's use the crime robbery. Equitable sentence doesn't mean everybody charged with a robbery gets the same sentence. That's not what it means. Even though that's a non-lawyer would look at the term equitable sentencing and think that's what it means. What equitable sentencing means is if everybody was on equal footing, that the sentence is fair. So the court takes into consideration, there is a statute that is applied and factors that you consider. And for example, once someone is found guilty or they plead guilty to something, the court takes into consideration all their prior convictions for traffic offenses, misdemeanors or felonies. They take into consideration the potential, if they had been on probation before, how they performed on probation. So it's the federal system is a point system. So everything has a point, and then they add up the points, and then it goes into figuring out what the sentencing range is. In state court, if it's a higher level felony, most likely a pre-sentence investigation will be done, which is means someone will be found guilty or plead guilty. And at that point, the judge orders a pre-sentence investigation. So a PSI writer, which comes from the probation department, will go out and interview the defendant, and then also go check the record, do a family history, drug and alcohol history, mental health history. And so it gives the judge a foundation to look at, to review when determining what the appropriate sentence is. Now, when it comes to equitable sentencing, everybody is their own person, and everybody's record is going to be different, and everybody's family upbringing is going to be different. And so what we try to do and what we're supposed to do is make it so that the playing field is level. So just because, say, you have a juvenile record where you've been in trouble and you've had a bunch of truancies, but you have no adult record, and then you have someone who's charged with the same crime who has no juvenile record, okay, so you would think, okay, the person who has a juvenile record should be punished more harshly because of the standard that he has a record, he or she has a record. Well, I disagree with that, because if you're raised in a household where parents are absent and there's nobody helping you get to school and there's nobody guiding you, you are not on equal footing to someone who was raised in a two-parent household where both parents worked and they had opportunity, because they're not going to have the same problems as a juvenile. So when I think of equitable sentencing and what the court in general thinks of equitable sentencing, is we have to look at all the factors, because if you're poor and you're raised by a single mom who's got to work two jobs to keep you in a housing, you're not going to have as much supervision. So you may get in more trouble than somebody who has a two-parent household. And I have to take that into consideration and not punish that person harsher who has more needs, and maybe they just need more guidance. I have really tried hard to consider everybody as an individual. And when I go back and check myself, like I sentenced somebody today, and then I look back on somebody who was in a similar situation 2 or 3 years ago, I have been able to be very consistent in my sentencing. Like right now, we all know the big problem in Franklin County is guns, kids with guns. And if I look at how many young men I have that are African American who come from low income households who have 2 or 3 cases where they've been caught with a gun, but when I also learned that they've had siblings killed and cousins killed and they're carrying a gun for protection, yeah, their record would justify a prison sentence, but is that really, that is not equitable. I could justify a prison sentence because of the repeated violations of their probation, but that is not an equitable sentence for their circumstance. And so what I do is I just had another young man who came before me, and he has had 3 gun cases in 4 years. And I'm like, young man, I'm trying not to send you to prison. You have to be working as hard as I am to not send you to prison. And so what I kept doing was continuing his case out, and he spent a year where he moved out of that neighborhood. He got a job, his first full-time job. He's held for a year. He's had no trouble. He's done everything I've asked him to do. And so I determined, with the proper guidance, he was able to break the cycle. And when he came before me this last time, I said, okay, you've done everything for a year. I've continued this case out long enough to give you the opportunity to use the resources we're offering to help you make another step. And so I'm going to keep you on probation. You're doing what you need to do. I want you to be safe. I don't want you to get shot in the street. And if you're carrying a gun, you're far more likely to end up dead. I mean, that's just the facts of this county. And he actually broke down in tears and said, Your Honor, I just want to thank you because you and my probation officer believed in me when I didn't. I didn't think I had a future. I didn't think I was going to survive. And here I am today. And now I believe in me. And isn't that the right result? In my opinion, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be helping people who don't have the tools gain the tools to be successful. And part of what you must have to be successful is faith in yourself. And you have to learn that no matter how I was raised, no matter what my environment is, there's a way to move past it and accept the help and move forward. So when I could think of equitable sentencing, that's what's fair for this young man, because nobody spent his years from 10 to 18 holding his hand, helping him move forward, helping him not focus on regret for his decisions, but focus on his own mental health, focus on moving forward, focus on getting training for a job, and what do you want to do for a living? Because you can live. If I was raised in an environment where everyone is getting shot, I'm not going to care too much about what am I going to be doing when I'm 25 if I don't think I can live past 16. And those are the really important things. Now, if he had continued hurting the community, if he had continued committing crime, and I would have had to put him in prison. But I also, because he hadn't done anything violent with a gun, and he just kept getting caught with a gun, in possession of a gun, I could use my leniency and give him the opportunity to make other choices. If he had shot somebody or shot at the police, that would be different because that's a different level of crime. But so many people come before me because they've never had any proper guidance. And so my job at the court is to stop crime and to protect the public, which means giving people the tools to move past their current environment and be successful as law-abiding citizens. That's what I'm supposed to be doing, not just warehousing people. Now, I tell people on a regular basis, don't take this niceness and this consideration and understanding as a sign of weakness. You hurt the community, you continue to be violent, and you will see a different side of me. And it's not a threat, it's just a fact. There are people that come before me and they think, oh, I'm going to, talk her into giving me one more chance. But if you continue robbing people, if you continue stealing cars, if you continue hurting people who are working for a living, I have to take you off the street because that's not fair. But you can make a mistake or two. And if you take the right path, you don't have to go to prison. And that train ride where everyone just thinks everybody goes to prison, that thinking is part of what we need to change. Not just, and I'm not talking about the bench, I'm talking about society.
Wow, so you give people a chance to even really to know themselves so that they can be successful. Because you mentioned that they can be success without having faith in themselves.
Right. Right.
How do you balance the goals of punishment and rehabilitation in your sentencing?
I use, well, the law provides statutes, and for lack of just to dumb it down, checklists of things you have to look at. And one of the things you look at is the recidivism. What are the factors that mean that this person is going to continue breaking the law if they don't, no matter what we do, okay? And so the biggest problem I see for people who can't stop breaking the law are the people who have substance abuse disorders. Many people don't understand that in the general public that often someone who becomes addicted to something, the underlying reason that they're addicted is because they suffered some trauma and they're not being treated for the trauma. And so they are what's called a dual diagnosis. And so they have a drug addiction or an alcohol addiction, they're some type of substance abuse, but they also have an underlying mental health condition that either hasn't even been diagnosed or needs treatment. So, for example, these are the hard ones to really work with sometimes, because if they're not willing to work with you, they continue to commit crime. So what I have to balance is what kind of crime are they committing? So say they have 2 or 3 drug cases, which is very common if you have a substance abuse problem. If you have 2 or 3 drug cases, and then you keep testing positive for an illegal substance. Now, that is a crime, but I consider that different than the person in that same situation who not only tests positive, but is stealing cars or breaking into homes or mugging people to get money for the drugs. If you continue to physically hurt other people or financially hurt other people by breaking into cars, I'm going to have to put you what I call on timeout. You're going to have to at least be in jail for a length of time for me to make sure you are sober and then get you into a program that is inpatient and will deal possibly with all your issues. But if you just continue to hurt society, you're gonna go to prison a lot quicker for violating probation, because you continue to commit crime. And for example, I've had people who don't ever get charged with the drug charge, but they'll have 7, 8, 9 cases where they've stolen something from somebody or broken in someone's house. And at that point, I then have to think about society over their needs, and I'm going to have to incarcerate them. If they have 6 or 7 drug charges, but they're not committing crimes and getting caught for crimes that are other than the drug possession, where they're committing crimes to get their drug money, then I can work. It's easier for me to work with them and put them in program after program, because if you have a serious problem that you've been dealing with for years, usually the first time in rehab does not cure you does not get you on solid footing. So we have to accept the fact that they may stumble, and that's one of the things I tell the people who have addiction issues. I tell them, listen, we have a lot of tools that we can help you. Please, if you stumble, call your probation officer, get the help you need. Not coming to probation doesn't leave me much choices of what I'm going to do. But if you go to your probation officer and ask for help and enter a program, then I see that you're trying. Ignoring us and going out and committing more crime is a different problem. So those cases are very difficult because addiction is it gets a hold of people, and nobody wants to live that way. I am quite positive that nobody wants to be living on the street hustling for drugs. But again, if you're harming the public or you're a violent person, then you're going to sit in jail or go to prison because I have to protect others.
Yeah, you have to protect the public. So, how do you balance the, do you consider racial and socio-economic disparities in your sentencing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because that goes back to, for equitable sentencing, you want people to be on the same footing, and people are not on the same footing. And so I have to take into consideration their financial background, their home life, their education, their work history, all those things. Now, when you use the term their race, to me, it's not about their race. It's about their socioeconomic standing, which unfortunately we know that means you're often dealing with certain cultures, be it Hispanic or African American. But I don't necessarily look just at the race. I'm looking at the family environment, their opportunities, those kinds of things. That's what the PSI is often 20 or 30 pages long. We get a lot of information from the defendant themselves, but then they go out and they try to verify, call family members, call former employers, check school records, check mental health and medical records. But if we want to talk economic issues, for example, medical marijuana is legal in Ohio. And so when you're on probation, unless you are approved for a medical marijuana card, you're not supposed to be using THC. However, I had one defendant who, after he got put on probation, he got cancer and he's in cancer treatment, and he's using THC to help mitigate the illness that he's getting from the cancer treatment. But he can't afford to get a medical marijuana card, and he can't afford to go to the dispensary and buy the marijuana. So the probation officer and I staffed it, and she goes, well, he's testing positive. What do you want me to do? And I'm like, well, that's where we talked about, well, can he even afford the card? And she's like, no. And I said, well, then we're not going to sanction him for that, because why would the haves get a benefit of not being punished for having THC in their system when this gentleman actually has cancer and he just can't afford it? So I take it into consideration in not only sentencing, but in the rehabilitation portion after they've been sentenced and they're on probation. People are out there struggling, and they get on probation, but they're struggling with so many problems. And you have to take those into consideration. You can't just say, here are the rules, you must follow the rules or you're going to prison. That would not be equitable. If you have a 20-year-old kid who has now tested positive for AIDS and he's having trouble getting a job and focusing, I am not going to punish him because his health concern, which has nothing to do with the crime he committed, is of grave importance, and I cannot ignore that. I'm going to treat him differently than somebody who is just ignoring the rules of probation and does not have a reason.
Thank you. Do you also Yeah. Do you also consider victim statements when making a decision about sentencing and whether or not you believe that sentencing is equitable?
Yes, the victims in Ohio, the law requires the victim to have an opportunity to come and speak at sentencing. Um, and so we always make sure the prosecutor is their victim's advocate makes sure that they have an opportunity to come to court. They always have a right to speak, and I will typically let, like if it's a family situation, 3 or 4 family members come forward and speak because they have a right to be heard. But they also have a right to get closure. And sometimes that opportunity to come in court and safely face the person who has caused their becoming a victim, I think that is a really healthy part of the healing process. Now, sometimes victims want things that aren't even legally possible because they don't fully understand um, the limits in the law about sentencing. But I do my best to listen to them, and if I cannot do what they're asking me to do, or it is not the right answer, I give a pretty good explanation as to why someone's getting a sentence that they're getting. So what typically would happen is on the sentencing day, the prosecutor speaks first, so the victim would speak first, or the prosecutor would speak first, then the other one would go. And then after that, the defense counsel gets an opportunity to speak, and then the defendant would get a chance to speak, and then I would make my ruling. So if I cannot do what the family is asking me for, or the prosecutor has determined that what they're asking for just isn't the right resolution in the matter, we do our best to explain it to them on the record, but we definitely listen to them. They can speak as long as they want. And you have to let the victim speak, and you have to take what they have to say into consideration.
You have to take what they have to say into consideration. And can you share your thoughts on the role of mandatory minimum sentences on the impact of equitable sentencing?
Um, well, the law is law, and I'm required to follow it. So I believe that the nature of why mandatory minimums have been set is because the legal culture believes that that's a deterrent. But also, it does force the hand of the prosecutor when making deals. There can't be racial inequity. If there's a mandatory minimum, then that's what that's the baseline. And then you're either going to stay there or you're going to work your way up, and that's where the PSI and everything else comes into consideration. So when it comes to the mandatory minimums, I believe they've been put in place. The spirit is to make sure that everybody starts at the baseline, the same baseline, and then there's a range. But keep in mind that what someone's charged with and what someone pleads guilty to is not often the same thing. A lot of times there's plea bargaining and there's a reduction in the charge, which will eliminate the mandatory minimums and give somebody an opportunity for probation. That happens a lot. And that power is with the prosecutor's office, and they do reduce charges quite a bit. It's not because the person deserves a chance. It's also because sometimes the victim doesn't want to come to court and doesn't want to have to go through a trial, and so they're okay with a reduction out of the mandatory minimums. So there's a lot of it provides the baseline, but there is also plea negotiations that go on that can reduce people out of those mandatory limits, which I think is often fair, because if you've never been charged, like I recently had a gentleman who was charged with felony 1 drug possession. He had never been in trouble. He had no record, and that would have required a mandatory minimum of 3 years. But because he had absolutely no record, and then while the case is pending, he didn't even get a traffic ticket and showed proof of employment, they reduced it to a felony 3, which allowed me to put him on probation. And that was fair, because for the whole time that once he got arrested, he got out of jail, he was acting appropriately and he had never been in trouble. And so that took him out of the mandatory sentence. It took him out of the mandatory minimum and allowed me to give him a chance on probation. So, and then if he doesn't do what he's supposed to do, he still has, I could still sentence him, because the maximum on the count he pled to would be that mandatory minimum. So he could still get the mandatory minimum if he doesn't move forward in a positive manner.
Thank you. And just too long ago, you denied the early release application of a well-known TV personality in Columbus who was convicted of child pornography. Was there any kind of personal pressure when handling cases like that? That, of someone who's famous, of a case that is very popular in the media?
Um, I don't feel pressure. I have a job to do, and it doesn't matter who you are. That doesn't mean that when there's cameras in the courtroom, it doesn't make me a little more nervous, but I will not be influenced by the media to do anything. And one of the things that I feel that I should give a sentence that the person should serve. Not a sentence that if they behave right in prison, I'm going to let them out early. And so judicial release is a privilege, it's not a right. And so when I give a sentence that I have determined is appropriate, that's what I expect you to serve. Now, there have been times where someone was on probation and then they get sent to prison. I will tell them, I'm trying to get your attention. I have no intention of keeping you in prison for 3 years. You'll be eligible for judicial release after 6 months, but I need to get your attention because you keep breaking the law. So I'm going to send you to prison, and as long as you behave well, I'll let you out and put you back on probation. But right now, you're not following the rules, and it's much more of an attention getter if I send somebody to prison after they've messed up probation, unless they just commit more and more felonies. But when I send somebody to prison, that is the sentence I feel is fair. So when people get denied judicial release, sometimes it's because their institutional summary, which means their prison report card, is bad. And sometimes it's just because that is the sentence I felt you needed to serve, and you'll be serving it.
Thank you. It's been wonderful talking to you for almost an hour now. And, I'm happy and appreciative of the fact that you come on this show to educate the community. What does it mean to you for you to come on this show to talk to the community? What does coming on Legal Angle means to you?
It's a wonderful opportunity to have an informal conversation and maybe get more information out, because I feel that the general public really don't understand what we do. And so then they read an article in the paper and they get an impression that isn't accurate. So it gives me an opportunity for the public to see me, to maybe get to know me a little better, know where my heart's at and where my head's at, and where I really stand on things. It's hard when you're a politician, because I don't consider myself a politician, but when you have to get elected, you're a politician. So it's a nice opportunity to see, for people to see and get to know me and know that I'm really doing the best I can.
Thank you very much. It's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you for taking all those questions and for educating us about equitable sentencing. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much.
And for those of you watching this show or listening to this in your car or on the phone or just as an audio podcast, we thank you for your time. And until next time, stay blessed. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, to our Facebook page, and also to the podcast. Until next time, take care. Bye for now.